episode 238 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Apologies for the late functioning of this service. I don't know whether you'll be pleased to know that Sid has got his voice back, especially those of you who heard his Irish accent a few weeks ago on the CRICKETher Weekly. Sid, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good. Obviously, we're going to talk about the World Cup. There were two big matches yesterday, which was one of the other reasons that we delayed recording. So let's talk about where we are and the permutations from here in terms of who reaches the semi-finals. If we start with Group A, obviously Australia are not only already through to the semi-finals, they have definitively topped the group, whatever happens. But what about the other semi-finalist in Group A?
Yeah, I mean, that's still all to play for. So you've still got three teams that in theory could qualify. So we've got one more match to go, which is Pakistan against New Zealand.
Yeah.
If New Zealand win that match, then they're definitely through. So, but if New Zealand lose that match, then New Zealand could go through.
Right.
Or India could go through.
Right.
Or Pakistan could go through.
Wow, okay.
So that's all up in the air and we'll find out. So it's gone right down to the wire and we've basically got four teams in that group that are for those two qualification spots. Obviously one of them's decided now, but it's gone right down to the end.
Okay.
So that's the Group A.
Okay.
Group B, which is the one everyone's interested in, of course, because that's England's group.
Yeah. Nobody's qualified yet.
Nobody's qualified yet. So we've got, again, one more match to go. Three teams could qualify and any one of those three teams could qualify. So we've got England, West Indies to go. And that's very much a sort of virtual quarter-final. If England lose, they're almost certainly out. There are a couple of circumstances where if England lose, they could still go through on net run rate because there's a couple of circumstances. If they lose a very close game and score under 134 or more than 200, then they could lose without falling behind South Africa's net run rate. But mostly, if England lose, they're out. If West Indies lose, they're out. South Africa, therefore, almost certainly through.
So they're in a stronger position than England.
But not mathematically through, because there's still those couple of chances.
So South Africa are in a stronger position than England,
well, in a way,
having lost to England.
Yeah,
it's very interesting, and the maths of it is absolutely fascinating and completely beyond my understanding. You spent quite a significant amount of yesterday afternoon
scratching my head,
doing maths, and seem to be better at doing maths than the England analysts. But we'll return to that in a minute. Let's talk about Australia v India first, because that was kind of in terms of sort of overall World Cup situation and likely competitiveness, that was the big one yesterday. And Australia did win in the end. On paper, it looks quite narrow, so 9 runs is not an awfully big amount. But it did feel like to me that India were never in control of that run chase.
Yeah, I mean, the closest they got was when it got down to the last 2 balls, and they were like, well, we could do this if we hit 2 sixes off the last 2 balls, which is what they ultimately needed to do, just to get a super over. But, you know, I mean, by that point, it kind of felt like it obviously wasn't going to happen. How many times we've seen this with Australia? They're in control of these games, even when they're close. And they knew that they didn't need to worry about net run rate. As long as they won the game, they were going to top the group. Yeah,
it's an interesting one. Obviously, Australia themselves, when they were batting, ended up being about 101 for 5, I think it was, after 15 overs. And you go, at that point,
pretty pleased with that.
Yeah, that's actually quite a sticky situation. If England had been in that situation and had lost a couple of quick wickets, I would have been really concerned. But you just feel like when Australia do it, it doesn't matter. They've got the batting depth and the batting stocks to dig themselves out of that situation, and they did it, and they got to over 150 in the end, and that proved just a bit too much for India to chase.
Yeah, absolutely. And India didn't quite have the urgency, did they? I mean, you know, so, you know, up top, they did score more runs in the power play than Australia did. But, you know, once they'd lost a couple of wickets, you know, it was all down to Harmanpreet. That's what their coach said in reflection afterwards. He was like, well, it all comes down to Harmanpreet, and she did her best, but, you know, she can't do it every time. So, but India, you know, not quite out, still possible they could qualify. So, you know, we could still be talking about India being champions this time next week.
It is still possible. I think that where India went wrong, though, if New Zealand do lose to Pakistan, as you say, there are still kind of a number of permutations, and India have actually put themselves in a poor position in net run rate terms by not chasing down those runs against Pakistan quickly enough and actually being a bit too chill.
Yeah, they went to sort of game management mode, made sure they won the game, but ultimately, these tournaments are so short and net run rate can have huge swings. As we can see, England's net run rate, if they lose today, could fall, by almost half a net run rate really easily. You only have to lose by about 30 runs for that to happen. You were praising Smriti Mandana for her being quite chill and laid back last week in terms of like the confrontation they had with the umpire. She was arguably a bit too chill and laid back against... in that game against Pakistan.
I think that's an interesting point. Obviously, my point was about being calm when things go wrong and you have a problem, rather than being very calm when you're in a high pressure run chase and you really could do with a massive boost to your net run rate. And as I tweeted at the time, actually finishing with 6 wickets in the bank, but with only a few balls to go, is just inexcusable. When you think about the possible permutations and where India could potentially end up, because they could end up being knocked out on net run rate. And it does come down to New Zealand, Pakistan, so we'll obviously be watching that very closely later today. Now, Australia are obviously also a little bit unlucky with a couple of injuries. Taylor Vlemick must be possibly the unluckiest cricketer in the history of cricket in injury terms. So that's very unfortunate for her to have to go home after not even getting to bowl.
She's dislocated her shoulder just by diving on the boundary. I mean, in a way, similar to what happened to Alice Capsey, not in the sense of the actual injury, because it's a very different kind of shoulder injury, but it's the same sort of thing of
fielding process. And something very catastrophic.
Fielding is a risky business, and unfortunately, she didn't get the dive quite right. Put a load of pressure on her shoulder, and it went. And
that's horrible.
Not good. So and she's definitely out for the World Cup. She's been replaced. The feeling is that she probably won't be back even for the Ashes, but we'll see about that. I mean, you can only wish her luck, really. I mean, you don't wish that on anybody, do you?
No, absolutely not.
And
but obviously Alyssa Healy is the other, probably a bigger blow, because when your captain gets injured, that's always going to affect the team. Although looking at the way Australia played against India, they seem to have got by okay, because after all they are Australia.
Jury got Mooney in the bank, basically.
Exactly. Jury is out on when Alyssa Healy will be back, whether she's going to be able to play in their semi-final, and we don't know, by the way, if India don't qualify, whether Australia's semi-final will be on Thursday or Friday. If that has been communicated to anybody else, please let us know, because it would be quite handy to have a steer on that. And if she can't play in the semi, whether they're holding out hope that she might then be back for the final.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, we don't know how. Cricket Australia sent around a press release. They said she had acute foot injury. Well, I mean, I'm glad it's cute. That's nice for her. But I want to know how serious it is, Raf.
How do they know it's cute? Because she's in a moon boot.
But
Oh dear, Sid, that was really terrible. Apologies to our viewers who are now wishing that we'd recorded the broadcast when Sid had no voice. We also had a question come in from Mark on Twitter about something that happened during that Australia-India game. It was actually the Phoebe Litchfield switch hit LBW decision. He says, could you reflect on Jacqueline Williams overturning it? Does this incentivise switch hitting because it may nullify LBW appeals? Do you want to take that one, Sid?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt the decision that was ultimately made was correct according to the law. It does look like that, it looks difficult because, once the batter has changed their stance, you think, well, that is outside leg stump now because they've changed their stance. But their stance is taken at the moment the bowler starts their run up. That's how the law currently stands. Mm-hmm. We can argue that you want to change the law. Mm-hmm. Does it incentivise switch hitting? Well, it does a little bit, but switch hit remains a very risky shot. There's still a very good chance that you're going to get bowled or, caught or, So I don't think that we're suddenly going to see a million people switch hitting as a result of this. The one thing I suppose that you might see in theory is that somebody a right-handed batter might realise that if they start off in a left-handed stance and then switch as soon as the bowler starts their run-up, then that negates a load of LBW options. But if that starts actually happening, then the MCC are clearly going to change the law within 5 minutes, and which we know they can do because they have, in a couple of cases in the reasonably recent past, changed the law very quickly when it became obvious that somebody was making a mockery of it.
I mean, the other thing to say is that, I've never played cricket at a high level, but switch hitting is quite difficult.
I've barely played cricket at a high level, right?
There you go. But you know, I would think that kind of technically, it's actually quite difficult to pull off a switch hit, even if you totally premeditate it and you know you're going to do it. You've still got to contend with switching your position at the last minute, and that's very difficult, and disrupts your concentration and disrupts a whole load of other things in your process. That means that you therefore kind of almost mitigate any advantage that you gain purely by doing it.
So I think it's a legitimate shot within the frame of the game, and I think we'll continue to see it, but I don't think we're suddenly going to see 1 million people pulling out a switch hit every other ball because of this.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's talk about England v Scotland then. Sid, are you going to do your William Wallace impression for viewers?
I'm not planning to.
We've already offended some of the Gaelic viewers, so we might as well go the whole hog and offend the other half.
Oh no, I wouldn't do that.
Oh no. Pretty comprehensive by England in the end, winning by 10 wickets within 10 overs. You couldn't probably have asked for very much more from an England perspective.
Well, I mean, with the bat, certainly it was one of those games where Jon-Balled clicked and everything came off, and you know, Maya Boucher and Danny Wyatt were out there. You know, they had more fun than they've had in months. And you know, England were. I mean, at that scoring rate, they would have scored over 200. So you know, fantastic performance.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to say about. I was just going to say about Jon-Balled is that it comes off. It's come off spectacularly twice in the last 2 World Cups. One was yesterday against Scotland, and the other time was in South Africa against Ireland. And so that's great and that's lovely. But if your big tactical approach only works against kind of the sort of the 2 slightly weaker sides in the World Cup, is it actually working as an approach?
Yeah, that's definitely an open question there. And the other thing is that again, England struggled to take wickets. They only took 2 wickets in the first. In the first 10 overs, they only took 1 wicket, right?
No wickets in the power play.
And they took the second wicket was at 10.2 overs or something. So they basically took 2 wickets, 10 first. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's not really good enough.
They weren't penetrative enough, basically.
You know, you need to take more wickets than that. And considering that Scotland, you know, are not the strongest side, then they probably should have done better. From a Scotland perspective, though, it was a reasonably decent performance. How are Scotland going to feel as they go home? Because obviously, they're on their way home now, but how are they going to feel about the World Cup, Raf?
Yeah, well, obviously they aren't going home with any wins. It was interesting that Catherine Bryce said that she felt that the schedule had made things a bit trickier for them because, for example, they would have been really targeting that game against Bangladesh, but it was their first World Cup match. And actually to kind of put that on a team who aren't used to World Cups, and even though it's being played in the UAE, neutral venue, not many people at the ground, there's still that kind of psychological weight of expectation that comes with being in a World Cup that none of those players have ever experienced before. And she said, it actually takes people a little while to settle into that. So if we played Bangladesh last, maybe instead of having to play our strongest match against England last, then we might have had more of a chance of going home with a win. I think that Scotland have got to just look on this kind of as a sort of almost like a stop on what's a longer journey, right? And I actually wrote a piece for The Guardian last week about the kind of history of Scotland women's cricket, and interviewing somebody like Carrie Carswell, who was there when Scotland played their first official international in 2001, and just looking at it and going, well, we're 2 decades on from that, and we've gone from having literally no structure and only having like 15 people in the whole country to choose from for our match, to actually qualifying for a World Cup against all of these teams who are much better resourced than us. And they've just got to look at that and kind of come away from it with some pride, actually. And I really don't mean that in a patronising way. I think just, they got to the World Cup, they deserve to be here, they did compete, they didn't win, but there will be more World Cups in their future. Yeah, absolutely. And really significantly, I think many of their best players are still young enough. They've potentially got 4 or 5 more World Cups in them. Absa Maksud, really good point. Both the Bryces. Yeah. Olivia Bell might have 10 World Cups. Well, no, that's big. She might have 6 or 7 World Cups left in her career, for example. Well, they come round quickly these days. She might even have 10. But you see the point. It's not like, some of the other teams that are relying on one player, that player's getting on a bit now. I mean, look at Atapatu in Sri Lanka.
Whereas with Scotland, their top players are, not even necessarily at their peak yet.
Yeah.
There's still quite a lot of their journey to go. If they can carry on playing until they're, mid-30s, there's still plenty of time left for them to build on this.
It's very exciting, actually.
So, yeah. Take a lot of positives home for Scotland.
Definitely. Can I just return, though, to England's approach in that run chase, Sid? Because I thought it was really interesting that, Maya Boucher said afterwards, Danny White-Hodge and I had no real conception of how quickly we needed to chase those runs in order to try and kind of boost our net run rate. And then after about 7 or 8 overs, whenever it was, Freya Kemp came running out and actually passed on the message and said, can you try and chase this in 10 overs? And that was the message. If you do that, then you'll overtake South Africa and probably West Indies net run rate, which they did do in the end. But your calculations suggest that even that was in some ways a kind of pointless exercise.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit pointless, to be honest, yes. They needed a decent net run rate, definitely, because there is that charm. You don't want to wind up losing to the West Indies by 2 runs and finding out that if you'd won by an extra 1 ball in this other match, try and get the runs as quickly as possible. But the reality is that those net run rate calculations are quite difficult. I spent most of England's innings hunched over a spreadsheet trying to work it all out.
Yeah.
Their analysts would have been in exactly the same place because you can't work out the net run rate in advance. You need to wait until the first innings is complete before you can start doing the calculations.
Yeah.
So you wait for the first innings to complete, you make your calculations, and then even then it's very much sort of scenario based. You have to plug in numbers and go, okay, what happens if we score 140 in 20 overs and they score 141 in 18 overs?
Okay.
So
the analysts were probably still doing the calculations.
Yeah, the analysts were sitting there scratching their heads.
Wyatt went out to bat.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. So in a way, net run rate is not a great way of differentiating teams. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's the least bad way.
Okay, all right.
I mean, there's a lot of criticism of net run rate because it can feel, arbitrary and unfair.
Yeah. It's also very inaccessible from a fan perspective.
It is very inaccessible.
Because when you're trying to work out who might qualify, who needs to do what, then you rely on, bods like you to actually sit down with a calculator for 3 hours.
Yeah, and we do get it wrong because
I'm very lucky to be married to you.
Well, we're running stuff manually, so it is definitely possible that we get it wrong.
And when you say you mean
come
you.
back and and then you have to come back and revisit it and go, oops, I got that one wrong actually. And I did actually do that in a women's county, right at the end of a women's county season once.
That.
I thought that Somerset had survived on net run rate. And I told Sophie Luff, I think you've survived on net run rate. And she was like, great. And then
you had to break it to her that she hadn't. So sorry about that, Sophie Luff, if she's watching.
Maybe she'd forgotten all about it and I've just reminded her of it. And
well, we know she's out in the UAE because she keeps being shown as one of the fans in the stadium.
One of the 3 spectators.
Yeah. Hope you're having a great time, Luffy. Don't think about net run rate and Somerset. We did have one last question come in, Sid, from James on Blue Sky, kind of about the World Cup as a whole. Has the World Cup been poor so far in terms of competitiveness and the standard of cricket? Do you want to take that?
I think
one?
that is a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think that you can actually separate those 2 things out.
Okay.
Because I think actually in some ways the World Cup has been more competitive than we expected it to be. Because what we've seen is that going into the very last match, you've got 4 teams in Group A in contention. Well, one of them's already through, but you've got 3 other teams in contention. You've got 3 teams in contention in Group B.
Yeah.
So it's actually been a more competitive and more level playing field. And what's leveled the playing field has been that the dominance of the power batters hasn't been as it has been in previous World Cups, particularly in that World Cup in Australia, where the power batters were able to go mad, as the Australian openers Alyssa Healy and Beth Mooney did in the final, and then put the game beyond anybody. So it's been more of a leveling experience.
Okay.
So yes, I think that in some ways it's less exciting to watch these sort of slightly ground out games. There's been very few. They seem to have dropped the 6 count from the television.
They've taken a strategic decision on that because they've decided that finishing the tournament with 3 sixes.
That's the 5th 6 that.
Woohoo! It's a good thing nobody's awarding some kind of prize on the per 6.
There might be actually, but they've just dropped that as well for all we know. Anyway, they've changed it to a boundary count, which is okay, fine. So I do understand that premise, but it's also acted as a levelling thing, which I think has made it really interesting.
Okay. I guess overall, for me, it has felt a bit less exciting than the previous couple of World Cups. But I don't know how much of that is because we're not there. We were in South Africa and we were in Australia, and we were very lucky to be at both of those. Actually, we were in the West Indies in 2018 as well. And now we're watching things at a distance. I think that you do feel a bit more removed. And it does feel kind of like less of an event. But I think that's actually been quite a helpful experience, certainly from my perspective, because actually that's the main fan experience, is watching it at home. So it's things like, you know, we're picking up on things where the TV are getting it a bit wrong, and they're showing the wrong camera angle, or they're, you know, this whole weird Legends segment, which just involves
let's not show a replay of what just happened. Let's instead show some dull photographs.
But it's not video footage, because often they don't have video footage. It's just like 3 photos of Karen Rolton from 2005, and then somebody says, "Well, she was a great batter, wasn't she?"
Absolute legend.
Yeah, absolute legend.
Legend of the
game.
And
then it's time for the next over, and that's it. So you're getting that perspective that you don't get when you're actually there. You get a very different perspective. So I think that's probably been good, because we're sharing in everybody else's experience of the World Cup. And as we do get more World Cups coming around more quickly, you know, that viewing experience does become important. And how do you generate that excitement for people who are just sat at home on their sofa? It doesn't feel like they've done a particularly good job of that this time. Okay. Anyway, thanks for your patience, for bearing with us. We hope we didn't ruin your Sundays too much. You certainly had plenty of cricket to watch in lieu of the CRICKETher Weekly, and we hope you've enjoyed this episode. See you next week.
Bye.